Alright guys, welcome back. GM Light here. Today we're going to be talking about Saw 4, pretty much where most people agree the franchise kind of started to dip in quality. I feel like this is where the rut kind of began for the franchise. So we're going to see how it held up, how my thoughts have changed. So let's get into it. If you haven't seen Saw 4, it's about when, during the autopsy of serial killer Jigsaw, a cassette tape is discovered in his stomach in which he warns his gory games will continue. Sure enough, SWAT Lieutenant Daniel Rigg is forced to follow a blood-drenched trail of torture, dismemberment, and death in order to find the two missing colleagues. A pair of FBI profilers follow Riggs, suspecting he might be Jigsaw's accomplice, even as they unlock the puzzle of the killer's origins, seen in gruesome flashbacks. So like I mentioned, this is kind of where the rut began. It really feels like after Jigsaw's death, the series kind of struggles to figure out what to do next, how to keep everything compelling and fresh, and there is a little bit of a staleness to this iteration of the franchise that I think it takes one or two movies to correct. But surprisingly, this is actually so far in my rewatches the Saw movie that I have the most notes on. It could be because this is the one that I feel the most mixed on, and that could definitely be part of what's playing into that. But I actually was kind of surprised that I have a lot to say about this movie, which I generally consider to be one of the more boring of the Saw movies. But with that, I don't hate it at all. There's not a single Saw movie that I think is bad or terrible or anything. I even kind of like this and found a lot more that I enjoyed about it than probably the other times that I've seen it, which I was kind of surprised to see. So I guess we'll get into the good first, and then from there I'll kind of take it into the negatives and then sum up my thoughts, because the movie held up a little bit better than I thought it would have. And kind of with that, starting out with the positives, the movie starts out hot. Start out with John Kramer's body, his autopsy. It's a very disgusting and gruesome scene, and it also just plays into that idea that Jigsaw had a plan for everything. Even after death, he was ready for anything, and he inevitably had that extra tape. That just feels like a very Jigsaw thing to do, have that contingency in mind. And it also, too, it builds on Jigsaw's character. This movie, they lay it on pretty thick with the Jigsaw lore and the backstory. That's some of the more compelling stuff in this movie, stuff that I really dug about it. You get introduced finally to Jill Tuck, John Kramer's ex-wife, which is a good introduction for what turns out to be definitely an interesting character. And what I like about introducing this other backstory, these tougher tragedies, is that it definitely fills in more of the gaps on Jigsaw's psychology, what pushed him to be the way that he is, and you get to see more of what he was like before he became Jigsaw. You're filled in a lot more because basically the first movie kind of leads you to believe that he was just a cancer patient that went off the walls and uses these saw traps to teach lessons to those that aren't dying and aren't faced with the same mortality that he is. But some of these later sequels like Saw 2 and like this movie kind of show you that it goes a lot deeper than that. He has a lot more lived experience, and there's also a pretty horrific tragedy that he suffers in this movie. And it's that the fact that they emphasize that tragedy in his life, that although very much doesn't condone what he does, obviously he can't, he's very much still the monster that he is, but at the same time they make him feel a lot more human and flesh out his character a lot more. You kind of see the line and the gap a lot more filled in between he just is a crazy person with cancer that just kills people, and he's a person that's fucked up, damaged, has all these problems, and it created a monster out of him. So just that Jigsaw, the flashbacks, the stuff with Cecil, seeing Jigsaw's first trap with Cecil is one of my favorite scenes of the franchise. You get to see kind of that rustic way that his traps evolve. Like, it's a very simplistic design with that first trap, and it makes sense that he wouldn't immediately have all the elaborate ones that he starts to have later. It's a very simple design of just once he gets through the knives, then he falls out of the chair, and that's pretty much it. It makes a lot of sense, and I also really dig the dialogue in the scene. It also finds a way to really make you fucking hate Cecil, just show that he's just a scumbag bastard, and it kind of makes you want John to get revenge on him. I think that's something that they're really going to do well in Saw X, is the fact that you're really going to hate these people that made John Kramer think he was cured of cancer. They're all scummy, and you're definitely going to want to see John get retribution for what they did to him. So that's something that also fed into what I really like about the flashback sequences in the movie, even if it kind of bogs down the runtime sometimes and slows up the pace and makes it a little bit more stop and start. But again, it gives you backstory on Jigsaw that I don't think detracts from it, because sometimes when you reveal backstory backstory, go into the past and stuff, you risk revealing too much and then kind of taking away from the mystery of characters. But with Jigsaw, I think it makes him more interesting and doesn't really detract from him. And this is probably the most emotional at this point in the series that we've ever gotten to see Jigsaw. We haven't really had that emotional angle to Jigsaw before, because in the past he's really only been shown to be cold, calculating. You never seen this aspect to him where he's upset, he's emotional, hopeful. He has a lot more range of emotions in this movie than we've really ever seen before. And because it's before he becomes this methodical, very calculated version of this character, it does make sense, and it's interesting to see that that's how he was before he became Jigsaw. As well as that, the traps are pretty intense. I think the main thing, the main trap overall is pretty interesting, the way that it sets up, and I also like the way that they kind of explore some of these new ideas of Riggs putting, like the example, the pedophile in the trap and testing him. I really dig that scene. That was a new and interesting idea that I don't think that they fully execute throughout the movie properly, but I like the idea that, but I dig that they tried something new and tried something interesting and unique for this franchise with that kind of newer aspect of it, making him complicit in some of these traps and with very detestable people like the abusive father and the pedophile. And to some degree, it doesn't completely reinvent the wheel or anything, but it works enough for the story. And also, you know, spoilers if you haven't seen Saw 4, but can't imagine you be here and talking about the Saw franchise if you haven't seen all of them or know what they're about. I really like the reveal that you find out that it's the concurrent timelines at the end of the movie, that after the opening credits, everything that took place from there on in happened exactly at the same time as Saw 3, and then at the end of the movie is when the ending of Saw 3 meets up with the ending of Saw 4, and you find out that they were happening at the same time in real time. I think it's a pretty good twist, and it doesn't really add anything to the story itself. I think that the movie would have played out just about the same regardless, but it's still a neat little twist, and it recontextualizes the movie and the timelines in a way that I find at least kind of cool. But now going on to the negatives, and you know, I have a decent amount to say with the negatives. You really feel the absence of Jigsaw in this movie. The movie really does feel like it kind of struggles to make it work without Jigsaw, and it doesn't seem to really know how to recover post John and Amanda. It's also one of the more generic feeling Saw movies. I think that this is kind of when the Saw movies start to get on the treadmill and the movies start to blend together a little bit. They feel a little bit more samey, and this is where I think that the episodic nature of the series can kind of feel like a detriment, because it doesn't feel as important. It just feels like just another Saw movie, which makes it seem by comparison a little bit more generic. And in that way, it's the fact that it doesn't feel bad or anything. It just makes it feel a little bit mid, because at the same time it's delivering Saw. It's delivering entertaining Saw footage, material and stuff, and everything about the story is, it's good, but it just feels a little bit complacent to the story that it's telling. And then with that, you're left with less interesting characters now that Jigsaw and Amanda aren't around. Riggs isn't especially compelling or interesting. I think he's kind of a cool character, but he also just falls into that, I think it's kind of a stereotype in the Saw franchise of just a workaholic cop who can't separate his personal life and the job. I also don't know how I feel about the lesson that he's supposed to learn in this movie. It feels a little bit contrived, and I also just don't think that he deserved to get tested for what Jigsaw's kind of putting him on trial for, like breaching doors too quickly or just not holding on to your horses. Like, I don't know. It's a little bit weird. I don't know that that fully works. Especially too, it's shown that he's clearly a good dude, and I don't think that wanting to save people is deserving of what happened to him. At least most of the traps aren't really at his expense, but still, you know, Jigsaw's playing with his life, and it feels a little bit unfair. I also think that the way that they treated Eric Matthews is kind of mean-spirited. I don't really like when sequels kind of dredge out main characters of previous movies just to kill them in kind of mean-spirited ways. Really, there was no need to bring him back besides making the plot work, because all they really do to him is they kept him in captivity for 6 months after the second movie, just kind of puppet his body around, and then at the end they just kill him. It feels a little bit unfair. It feels a little bit mean to do, and I kind of didn't dig that, to be honest. I'm also a little bit confused why Riggs didn't really seek help. I feel like he could have done that. If I'm not mistaken, or they explained it and I missed something, that's definitely possible, but I just can't help but feel like he could have gotten help in some way and not had to deal with this. It doesn't help too with the way that they leave all of the main characters like Matthews and Riggs and the lawyer and everyone at the end of the movie. It just doesn't entirely feel fair. It feels feels a little bit like too much, and you don't really feel like anybody there deserved to be there or in that situation. The punishment Riggs gets just isn't remotely equivalent to what he's on trial for, or I mean what he did, which I don't really think he did anything, but that's just me. And it also leaves Matthews as just an externality in somebody else's game, which is another thing where it's like Jigsaw claims he's not a killer, but it's like, are you, dude? I don't know. And then, of course, it's kind of a bad taste that Jeff just sort of gets murked at the end by Strom very unceremoniously. It's just mean, but all those problems, they kind of all culminate to make this movie one of the more frustrating ones. I do have positive things about it, but I also have negative things. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section of Saw 4. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.